pick up where we left off last time. I'm going to read 2 poems in each of the 4 sections again, and that'll leave plenty of other poems. There's, in that first section, remember the time after time section, that's really more devotional materials that I have. And one of the earliest set of poems I called the Seasoned Sonnets, and there are 4 of them. There's one for summer, one for fall, one for winter, and one for spring. Now, I've only included summer in tonight, so if you want the rest, I've got them for you. But this is one of the more playful and yet also pretty serious pieces that I've ever written. Let me tell you a couple of phrases here, so when I get them, you'll know what they mean. Crystal Beach was the public swimming pool in my little town, Madison, Indiana. And so that's the reference to Crystal Beach there. This is called the Flying Crucifix Baptismal Leap. The Crystal Beach boys plied their bag of tricks. The August sun, which left their shoulders burned, inspired the daring highboard leap they learned and later named the Flying Crucifix. To start, they never stepped but ran to lunge, with arms outstretched, removing east from west. They hung and crossed their feet as though for rest, suspending air and time before the plunge. In quick descent they followed speed, their hair and skin licked by the wind. From board to blue abyss the tingling backbones fell, then flew in buoyed bodies up to light and air. The reckless boys found the shameless loss and fearful thrill of taking up the cross. We did have a 9-foot diving board.
Oh, did you?
Oh yeah. And so we'd go, we'd go running off that thing like a bunch of Banshee Indians. And just that experience of kind of total abandonment.
Yes.
And then, of course, the water itself suggests the baptismal death and resurrection movement. And yet, it's that full commitment, the fearful thrill. Because it was a little scary up there when you're about 9, 10 years old. But 9 foot is pretty high.
Now I'm 9 foot forward. Yeah.
So that was a fun poem to write.
Yeah.
Also, there are some images in the poem. If a poet is worth their salt, at least I would suggest to you that you should be able to reread pieces and little by little unfold certain elements within it that you wouldn't even think of for a while. I mean, I don't know how many times I have read poems, years, literally years, and then one day it's like, why didn't I see that before? Well, but that same deal with Scripture. Same experience. You read it, and then it's like one day it opens up to you.
Yeah.
But I'll let you in on a couple of little inside jokes here. The second line, the August sun, reference to Augustus Caesar for early Christianity.
Yeah.
I grew up in a town where we had a pretty strong minority of Roman Catholics, Catholic Church. A couple of my buddies were Catholics. And so the idea of the crucifix just lent itself. The image there of running to lunge, but the second line of that second stanza, removing east from west. The idea of your arms outstended, of course, like the cross, but where might you think of, or what might be an echo of removing east from west in Scripture?
Psalms?
As far as the east is from the west, so that's how far I will remove your iniquities from you. Yes, and honestly, it's good. It can never be north and south because eventually you do come back.
But east and west is
never, yeah, it never meets.
Yeah.
The idea of the descent, and then the third stanza, skin licked by wind. And anytime I use the word wind in my poetry, you probably ought to set up and take notice because there's almost always some kind of reference to pneuma. Not just wind, but also spirit. Yeah. The bored blue abyss, the tingling backbones fell. I mean, I can still feel my stomach flips on that. But when you hit that water, and we would usually hit bottom, going that fast, and then you couldn't help but come back out. It was just a resurrection of amazement. The idea of trying to physically represent spiritual realities is one of the things I think that many poets can do for us. The psalmists, for example, the prophets as well, they give us these concrete images that represent not just themselves but bigger issues. And we were made for three-dimensional space. We're not abstractors. We live this context. The next poem, Reflected Glory. This was actually an episode that took place during one of Johnson's week of evangelism trips. When I was first at Johnson, I was still taking students on week of evangelism trips, and we went up to New England, to New Hampshire. One of my good friends, David Reynolds, he and a couple of his friends from Lincoln had established a mission church up in what's the name of it? City, it's in South New Hampshire. It'll come to me later. I have a friend who says as you grow older, you lose your nouns first and then your verbs. I'm still losing my nouns. But while we were up there during that week, a nor'easter came blowing in, dumped, I think it was 9 foot of snow. 9 foot. Yeah. And what had happened, they had already, it was in spring, so they had pretty much mothballed all their equipment. But then they had to drag it back out. Well, one of the persons attending this seminar that these guys were doing, they needed to get home. And so Biff and I got out in, I think it was his 4-wheel drive, and we made it across town. And they lived up on a hill, so we walked them up to the hill and then walked them back down because there was no way that, not even that 4-wheel drive was going to go up. But it was one of those, beautiful nights. The storm was over, it had cleared up, full moon outside, and it was so quiet, it hurt. When it gets that muffled absorption, you can even, almost feel the blood in your ears. And as we were walking back down, I thought of this poem, or at least the idea for it. And it took me, 10 years to really finally word it out. But this is what it is. Reflected glory. Exposed in April's paradox, a spring turned winter, deep and cold, nor'easter white. We trudged through foot-deep snow that quiet night, like silent monks in tandem, worshiping. The moon came up and set the scene ablaze. It sparkled through each limb of ebony, and we beheld this gleaming ecstasy like holy lunatics struck dumb, half-crazed. And far beyond our sight, an endless weave of pulsing, vital light came spinning threads upon the moon, the road, the trees, our heads. A shadows danced by grace of moonlight's mass, and beckoned to the shining fields we passed. It's a missionary poem. That last couple you might remember, fields are white unto harvest.
Yes.
Okay. And the pun of the word mass, both in terms of largeness and in terms of a sacred service. The idea of my friend and I walking down this road like two crazy people, and we were kind of crazy to be out on a night like that, but it was so. But the idea was all of this, everything that we saw, of course, was based upon the moon, which is a dead rock. And yet, that night, it was alive because it reflected the glory of the sun. And that seemed to me to be a really important image for our discipleship walk. We are, no matter what we are, we have the potential of reflecting glory for others to see. Yep. By the way, anytime you want to comment or ask a question, please do. Like I said, I do know the poet, so I got an inside track here. Yeah, I can't say that with all poetry, but this one I feel pretty comfortable with. The next section are my Christmas poems. Advent is coming up here real soon. I wrote a series of 4 poems called Christmas Quartet, and I didn't know it at the time, but they were actually for Advent. I mean, they were poems you could actually use on Advent. And one for each Sunday before. And then, when I made the collection, I also wrote another set of Advent poems, but I peopled them with characters from T.S. Eliot poems. And I called it an altered Advent because these characters are off the wall, okay? And yet, they do kind of represent kind of what comes in through the doors any Sunday, for whatever purpose. And then I have, and I may end tonight with this one. I have this year's Advent. I've got four poems I'd like to read to you. I don't have copies of them, but it's about, well, I'll tell you what. But this is the first one. No, actually, it's the last one because I think is it the 4th Sunday Love? Yeah, this is the last one. Grace for Christmas Eve. Our gracious Father, thank you. Join us here this season. Bless our company and meal. For you have made us yours. You placed your seal on lonely lives and hearts impaired by fear. And not content to leave us bruised, you healed our deafness, whispered love, that single word, to give enduring peace. For having heard you call, we have become both forged and steeled. And not content to orphan us, you gave us comfort through the people we befriend, and then a comforter to make amends, transforming all attachments that we crave. Transform this gathering unto these ends. Make friends, family, and family friends. This one was the peace poem. It wasn't love, it was peace. So I think that's the 3rd Sunday. Could be used as communion meditation, but I actually use that poem as a dinner prayer for Christmas.
It's interesting, when I was growing up, never heard the word yet. I think it was too liturgical.
Yeah.
And people just did not use
Right.
Advent, never go around and Advent candle, Advent wreath. We never, it was just not in the church where I grew up. We just never,
Right.
it was just too.
Yeah, I've come to it late as well. You know.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I think it was, I think it had shades of denominationalism, and so you can't do anything, you know, you're not supposed to do anything.
Yeah, the idea of liturgy was very, very suspect.
Yeah,
But I did know the word from the Christmas Carol.
Mm-hmm.
Thine advent here, come bless thine advent here.
Yes, yes.
You know, it's in the, you know, and you think, well, you know, then you realize, oh yeah, that's the coming.
Yeah, kind of, yeah. And so and then we started it, it just became a tradition. People who did it, we just became part of that tradition.
Yeah.
I think there's been certainly a resurgence, I think, in the Protestant denominations of the Christian year as a whole. And
Yes.
I think when we, when you start learning about that, there is a cycle of the year, and it helps you to be able to prepare yourself even more. Obviously, that's what Advent is.
Mm-hmm.
But
preparation. Yeah.
Sure, and as well as Lent and the other Christian emphasis throughout the year. And so, I think there is kind of a resurgence of that, and more learning about that, which.
And that is, you know, I think one of the strongest arguments, or one of the strongest favors for doing both the liturgical year and the liturgical reading, like over 3 years' time, is that it covers everything, and you don't get to pick and choose.
Mm-hmm.
You are, in some senses, confronted with the message of God for that day, and you need to respond in some way to it. And I appreciate that. You know, that's a good thing.
You got any suggestions or resources here about this? I seriously don't know. I honestly don't know what to talk about.
You know, we think that's go.
Well, if go in and Google Advent, and then oh my word, and you
You
get
find
all
all
kinds of
kinds of
stuff.
information about the Advent week, the candle, where it started, how it started, and what each candle represents.
Yeah, and there are different ways of celebrating it too.
Oh, very much.
They do different colors. They do different passages of scripture for each one.
Purple,
Yeah.
the two purple, and then the joy is pink.
Pink.
And then the last one is love. And then there's four, and then the center is called Christ candle.
Christ candle. Yeah.
Usually elevated and larger, so it's yeah.
Well, one thing poets do is they look askant at things. they stand on the edge sometimes, and sarcasm and irony are not lost on us. And so, forgive my poem carol here, but it is. I don't know how you all are about the Christmas season, but I tell you, some Christmases it is just like too much. Just too much. So here's my rendition of that. As if by winter's darkened spell of time, the rich and would-be climb to deck their halls before they bustle off to shop the malls and plow through flurried drifts of season's rhyme. Exhausted by the fruitcake pace, they claim, angels we have heard get high, smoking totes of Mary Jane. Self-medicating jokes in amber spirits, numbing out the pain. Then, as the household drifts uneasily to sleep, they float a minor keyed refrain. O silent night, lonely night, how insane to celebrate our joy insistently. Oh, come, ye moneyed, dosing, empty elves, and sing the manger song, Emmanuel. Moneyed, dosing, empty elves.
When you're talking here about amber spirits, are you talking about a bottle?
Yes, I am. Exactly what I'm talking about. You got that right.
She caught that.
You got that correctly. That's right.
I feel bad.
Numbing out the pain.
pause. Hit that pause button. That's the best part of the season when you can find it.
Another started earlier.
Oh, listen, it started before Halloween. I mean, it's like Thanksgiving is just kind of a throwaway weekend. You know, actually it's a shopping weekend now. You know, I miss Thanksgiving. That was one of my favorite times of year. In the section Table Crumbs for Friends and Lovers, I do have friends, believe it or not. Joe and Jill Warren, I have known since junior high school. And they're a couple of my friends who, you know, you have those friends that you can just plug back into at any time of the year or any time of the decade. It's just like you never left it, right?
We got some friends.
Yep.
I know we hadn't talked in a while. We said, let's FaceTime.
Yes.
So they called, we started at 7 o'clock and finished at 10:15.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mom and I sit here and they sit and
I have learned the glory of Zoom.
Yeah.
I have been able to keep in touch with a few of my former students, and it's been just a marvelous thing. But Joe and Jill and Martha and I, we would do things, you know, once every couple of years, and they came down one year, and we drove through Cades Cove, and it was perfect. It was the first day of November. It was the height of the color. We had a van, so we opened up the door. We just drove slowly through the cove, and that's what this poem celebrates. Cades Cove, 97. November tumbles down the mountainside and flows throughout the cove this All Saints' Day, where four companions risk the haunting gray of floating mists and halt their pilgrim's ride to seek that orange spirit in the trees, concealed by streaks of red and streams of gold, until immersing rains retire them cold and damp, to rest beneath loquacious leaves. Despite the soggy shoes and dripping hair, a warmer laughter ripples limbs and grass. A moment lifted like the sacred mass, transformed and pure as autumn's baptized air. A day this good, with friends this good, inspires, with spirit holding, friendship's tongue fires. By the way, part of this poem is based upon Pennington was his last name. I can't remember his first name. He's a Kentucky poet. Studied under Jesse Stewart and taught at the University of Louisville for years and years. He was doing a workshop at Morehead State University when I was in graduate school. It was in the summer. And he said something that, you know, and it's true, you know, the most important aspect of any kind of creative endeavor is paying attention, seeing what's there and not what you think is there. And he said, for example, there is no such thing as an orange leaf. Now, this is in eastern Kentucky, all right?
Yeah.
So it'd be the same like saying it's down here, all right? There's no such thing as an orange leaf. He said, you find me an orange leaf, you press it between wax, I'll pay you $50 for that leaf. So all that summer, all that autumn, I tramped and looked, and every time I stopped, when you get up close, that leaf is either red or it's yellow. It is not orange. You pull back, and that tree looks as orange as it can be, because it's a trick of the light. The way that the light plays off of the keratin of red and yellow, and it somehow mixes and becomes orange. And so that's the quest of the orange spirit, looking for this thing that does not exist. And then you see it, but it's not there. It is. Now, there are some bushes, okay, little shrubberies that actually do have orange leaves. But you will not find a maple tree, or you will not find an oak tree. You will not find a deciduous tree that has an It's only orange by a trick of the light when you stand back.
I have to look for that.
Dude, I challenge you.
I will.
I would like to see one if you can find it. No orange leaves. No orange leaves at all. The next poem I wrote for a friend for the son of my friend. Remember last week's poem to Boaz? The one about him coming from western Tennessee and becoming from the Ohio Valley, and that celebration of our friendship. Young fellow. This is to his eldest son, who from time to time would be in my Sunday school class. And we were talking after class one day about just the whole concept of love. You know, what kind of loves are there? And how does that play out for us? And as he said that, I thought, I think I ought to write something about that for our discussion. And so this is the poem I wrote from his inquiry and from my discussion, called Love Kindled. A love impassioned, fire of white-hot flame, explodes the mind with searing flash and flush. It strikes the heart in driving sheets of lust, to leave its lover blinded, scorched, and lame. A love domestic, flame of sapphire heat, erects a picket fence to keep the good exchange of growing sparks in brick and wood within exclusive bounds where lovers meet. But love, communal, radiating gold, embraces all the hurt and hungry lost. This open bonfire reckons worth, not cost, extending welcome from the vagrant cold. All loves we kindle have their shining light, but which among them stays the damning night? When we speak of love, you're talking about a very broad and intricate subject. You got one word in English, love, and it stands for everything.
Everything, yeah.
And so that's one of the things that this poem kind of addresses. You know, Josh was asking, how do you tell the difference between these things? So this was my attempt to try to tell the difference in some ways between these things. I think the balance.
Covered real well with the white hot flame, one in fashion, and then,
Sapphire heat, that blue,
yeah,
and that yellow bonfire.
domestic.
The one that just draws us in.
Brick of wood.
Which is the house flame, or part of the flame, how is it?
The hottest is the blue.
Blue.
It's the blue.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the most destructive as well. That's the other thing, fire. I've got one of the poems in the collection is Candle Lighting for Ellen and Ross. Talks about, the service of candlelight and what candles and light and flame does really. Yeah, there's no happy poems in the acid section. But after I wrote this poem, I realized I was writing it about a cousin of my cousin who had died in a car accident. I was probably 12 years old at the time when she lost her life. She was 16, maybe 17 when she died. And I realized it, and her name really was Roxy, so I just kept that in this. That wasn't her gravestone. But I thought, oh my word, you never know where something is going to bubble up out of your past when you're writing. And this happens. But the idea of horsepower, of engines, and of the apocalypse just all merged in that little piece for me.
Yeah. Every world.
Yeah. Which, by the way, they're called the Book of the 12 these days, which is a pretty cool name for them. But we are right now getting ready to do Zechariah. Yeah, right? Zechariah.
We never know from week to week.
And Zechariah.
Different prophet, we didn't know. It's true.
Yeah, it's whatever prophet I show up with, as it turns out.
Okay, we're studying Haggai. No, we're not.
Yeah.
What was it, Zechariah?
But in Zechariah, you have those 8 visions, and one of them is the vision of the horses going back and forth, the horses and the myrtle. And the more I've read through the minor prophets, the more I realize you really need to have a background in the minor prophets if you're going to read Revelation.
Oh, yeah.
Because some of the imagery in Revelation, it's tied directly to what's going on in the minor prophets. It's just amazing how that works. But and it is poetry as well in that regard. The last piece of the collection, this is the last piece of the collection. You know how when you go out on those great old graveyards, you look at the lead scripture. We talked about that last week, and this is that point. It's subtitled "Weather." In dim October light, the weather heaps a cloudy harvest overhead, and reaps the rain with crooked scythe that forks and leaps from cloud to cloud. From cloud to earth, it leaps, tortured, streaming, beating down a deep tormented sigh of rising winds that creep and creep. In restive limbs where gravestones keep the fatal secrets bound to mortal sleep. But secrets have a way of slipping piece by piece from chiseled groove and lettered lease. The viscous howl and splattered fist release small flecks of stone, memorials decrease. Thus trust and dreams and all affections cease beneath the rain's erasure. So those are all from the Collecting Dust publication. I have 2. Well, actually, a series of 4, and then one that I want to read to you, just for fun. This is called Ghost Story.
Pardon?
Ghost Story. Ghost Story.
Ghost.
It's based upon picnics that the Wheeler side of the family were famous for picnics. Every summer, winter, fall, it didn't matter. We would do picnics. All right. So there was a little state park, Clifty Falls State Park in Madison, Indiana, and on October, sometimes Halloween night, we would go and do this picnic, and of course, try to scare each other as it were. And so that's what this poem represents. It's written in something called Spenserian verse, which is a 9-line unit, but it's got that same iambic pentameter and rhyming scheme. So, Ghost Story. We knew the story, told beside the woods, where captive shadows fluttered free this night from crackling purgatory. Inkling hoods across the rock house walls, cast out from bright canary flames, a picnic fire to light the spectral dance of shades in revelry, alluring on the stacked stone shelter's height, their bony fingers grouped in tempting glee before they haunted back beneath the secret trees. We kept a watchful Halloween around the flame and food, committed succulents and tubers from the fading fallow ground, where golden summer's dying arguments fell silent as the feathered parliaments, and using only paper plates and cups, We set the table full of compliments, awaiting frost and fog to come corrupt before the mausoleum winter shut us up. We heard the cautionary tale once more, the warning meant to keep us from those trees. A time ago, a little boy of 4 slipped off into an autumn's evening freeze, the wailing of a maddened mother's pleas. Her eerie lullaby, a lone crow's caw, that tossed across October's chilling breeze. The rumors of a yellow mist some saw come drifting down the hill to Riverside, and we jumped out of our shadows. Thudding throats and panicked glares, respiring hard, we sped throughout the shelter, open flapping coats in charged adrenaline. Our shadows fled from floor to rafter, shapes of anguish, dread swept outward, pulsing in perplexing sight, convulsing after some collecting thread. We never could fight down that screaming fright, but always knew, and knew full well, it's coming bite. Even when you know it's coming, it still gets you.
Yeah.
That was pretty much how it was too. You know, there was always somebody somewhere to jump out, and you knew they were there. They were going to get you.
Yeah.
Well, this is this year's Advent, and the 4 poems are actually sequential. They follow one upon the other. It's the same scene, and they're developed. The 4 poems are called Vision, Voice, Vigil, and View. And they deal with the first one, hope, the second one, faith, the third one, joy, and the last one, peace. I think that's the traditional Advent listing. There is a medieval poem called The Dream of the Rood. It's in Anglo-Saxon. And it's the cross of Christ talking to this person having a dream vision. You know, he's contemplating in Easter about the crucifixion of Christ. He goes to sleep, and before him stands the cross. And this cross starts talking to him and telling him all this stuff, you know. So I kind of like that vision of myself. And I thought I will play off of that. And so this is called Advent, Dream of the Rood. It's not the cross, however. Not that tree. A different tree.
Not the Joel.
Huh? Not the Joel root either. No. Vision, hope. One Christmas Eve, as all the children fell into reluctant sleep, I sat beneath our garnished tree, awaiting midnight's knell. The winding shadows circled like a wreath, as one by one the blinking lights went dark and blinked no more. And I, transfixed, kept still. So steeped in fearful hope and drenched in stark bewilderment, my throbbing chest went chill. Atop the tree, where once the sunlit star had twinkled clear and bright, a single bud emerged, then bloomed 6 golden blades. Some far-off valley bred the shoot from desert mud, but this narcissus bore an open scar, the yellow petals fused with flowing blood. I did not know this until I did the research, but the Rose of Sharon, most think is a narcissus, which has 6 petals. So that's that. Second Sunday, voice, faith. The blood dripped down from tip to trunk until a crimson sheet enveloped every limb, The oozing bud began to speak and fill the silent room with springtime's rustling hymn, resounding like a million drops of rain, all swirling, swooping, splashing in the wind. It charged the atmosphere with one refrain that rumbled from the flower's pulsing rim. Believe or not, the only choice to make. It blows all other choices cold or hot, and lays foundations base to build or break. It fills the line with every dash or dot, and cracks the walls for every love or hate. The only choice at stake, believe or not. Vigil, joy. So as the windy voice died out, in dread I knelt, but not with fear. For now the tree grew ever bright and flickered sunrise red, until the glow set all the shadows free. The radiating branches sprouted globes of effervescent colors, orbs that came, then went, then came again. A dazzling strove of throbbing timber, touched by tongues of flame. And still I knelt in watchful awe, in light that blazed and warmed, amazed at how I chanced upon this cavalcade, this dazzling sight of swirling tints and swaying shades that danced. My heavy, darkened, earthbound soul took flight in wondrous joy, contented and entranced. Fourth Sunday, view, peace. Then one by one the orbs discharged. The limbs went dim, then dark, until the gory robe dissolved into a fading spark. The grim and cryptic shadow left my heart to probe its truant good, until one by one the lights came on, and by the tree I stood, the room restored, the clock at 12, from passing night's strange memory, phantom blood and bloom. How should I hold such fervent sights, embrace the timeless wrapped in time? The once mundane transcends the apathetic commonplace, transforms the daily suffocating strain, transversed by ever golden, growing grace, where hope and faith and joy and peace may reign. I wrote that a year ago, and I really thought I had it. Then I came back to it in October. I didn't. And I had to beat it into submission. I worked and worked and worked on rephrasing it. It's funny how time can give you perspective to tighten it up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think anybody realizes that anytime you're writing poems or sermons or anything,
You know the old joke, you never finish, you only publish.
you know,
You never finish it, you just preach it.
someone asked me, said, when do you finish your sermon? I said, right before I walk in the pulpit.
Well, really though, isn't it true that you only finish it after the invitation hymn?
Oh, yes.
Isn't that when you finally finish it?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's...
It is good.
But,
Well, that is all I have for the evening.
In light of that, as far as, let's say you get stuck, do you have advice for, what do you do when you get stuck? Do you have advice for individuals that,
Yes.
is that right?
Well, one thing that you don't want to do is push.
Oh, okay.
I mean, you can investigate, you can kind of try to get yourself going. But the best way to start a block is to simply play. Don't worry about the end product. This is where a lot of creatives get really messed up. They think about the product and not the process. Engage the process. Enjoy the making. I mean, in the beginning, God made, you know. Now we have the earth and all that's from it, but the real delight is in the making. And if you can keep your eye on the process as opposed to the product, I think you also have to recognize that you will learn more over time. Something you write today, it will not be as effective 5 years from now. Or it may not be. Could be. We're still reading, poems 2,000, 4,000 years old that are very meaningful to us. But from the writer's vantage point, you never know. You just don't know. It's the same with preaching a sermon. You preach a sermon, and you really don't know what you're doing in terms of effectiveness. As a teacher, there are days, I get up, I do my presentation, and I think, well, that was a bust. Yeah. And then somebody says, that was, I get that now. I was like, okay. And then there are days I thought it was brilliant.
And nobody said that.
You can hear the crickets, a mile away.
Charles Spurgeon, the story, you may have heard the story. Charles Spurgeon, great preacher, of course. By the time he was 21, he preached to the thousands, and he preached until he died. And he had great bouts of depression.
Yes.
Great bout. And he went to the church and totally said, you don't need me, I need to quit. And he said, Spurgeon, we really have any part time as anybody else full time. Take the time you need. And one time in the depths of his depression, he just left and was just wandering out in the wilderness, in the woods by himself. He saw a little church. And he's like, well, he was just so overwhelmed, he was need to go. And he stepped in, he slipped into the back door, just sat down in the store, sit down. The fellow said,
he was a pretty big man, too.
He couldn't hide. But he was a big. Anyway, he sat down. The preacher up at the front looked at him in horror because he was preaching one of Spurgeon's sermons. Well, what's interesting, he had no choice. He preached it. Well, as he was leaving, Spurgeon grabbed him, tears flowing, told him he had restored his faith. He was ready to go back. He just could not say it. I mean, he was broken in tears. Wow. And he said, Brother Spurgeon, do you not know one of your own children just because it's dressed in a little different clothing?
How funny.
He said, no matter, you have restored my faith.
Yeah. But the idea of getting up and just doing the work and engaging it. The other thing that there is a book that I have that I've used. It's the Spiritual Formation and Creativity class I teach at Johnson. It's called The Artist's Way, A Spiritual Path to Creativity. It's by Julie Cameron. And she comes out of a 12-step program, and she has 12 chapters, 12 weeks. That she started this to try to get people who were blocked artists out of their. She says recovering a sense of strength, recovering a sense of compassion, and so forth. And one of her tenets is always you have to be willing to do bad art before you can do good art. Because what you learn in a piece that fails is often 100% more valuable to you in a piece that succeeds. This piece of advice I have translated into one of the primary footnotes. There are 5 footnotes of life, by the way. Every life has these 5 footnotes attached to them. And I think I can tell them here, although it's going to be recorded forever, so I guess I might as well own it. But the very first footnote of the life is, I'm probably wrong. That's the first one. All others follow from this. I'm probably wrong. Not I could be, or not I think, but probably. And it's not a matter of of denying one's intelligence or denying one's abilities. It's the reality that we don't know the end of all things. You know, you can do everything right, everything that you were supposed to do, and it still goes south. And so it helps just to keep in the back of your head that little thought, I'm probably wrong. Second footnote, bad reading makes for bad theology. If you are not careful with how you read situation, both the biblical text and life, you're going to go way off the reservation. The third footnote, which my father actually told me one night in a drunken stupor, he said, Ronnie, at the end of the day, we're all just a bunch of sons of bitches. And I'll tell you what, that surprised me. What surprised me about it, my father was a very proud man. I mean, he really was. And for him to own that. And then years later, I realized all he was doing was giving the street version of all his sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. I mean, it was like, okay, I get it, Dad. You're right. The fourth footnote comes from Cameron. You can look good or learn the skill, but you can't look good while you're learning the skill.
That's good.
And all I have to do to put this to my students is, do you remember when you learned to drive? When you got behind that wheel the first time? How did you feel? You felt like you were never going to make it. But you did. You made your mistakes. And that's how it is with creativity. You have to do bad art sometimes to get to good art. Just that. Last one comes from my dearly good-hearted grandmother, my dad's mom, actually, who told me on one occasion, actually I had gone down with my family and we were visiting, and Grandma had this old jewel teapot. Looked like Aladdin's lamp.
Jewel tea.
Okay. My grandmother used to make tea as her morning break, and when I was there with her, we would have hot tea, hot sweet tea, and saltine crackers. That was her snack. And all of us, you're not a wheeler if you don't know how to do tea and crackers. You just, that Marie made sure we knew that. And so I saw that teapot sitting on top of the refrigerator, and it was covered with grime and dust. I knew she wasn't using it. I said, Grandma, would you mind putting my name in that teapot? Because I really would like that someday. She says, okay, I'll think about that. But my family never says yes. They say maybe or I'll think about it. It's always equivocating. Well, when we got ready to leave, she brought me out this big package of newspapers. There's a lot of newspapers here. I want you to have this. And I said, is this a teapot? She said, yeah, I want you to take that. And I said, Grandma, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for you. And I started to equivocate, trying to. She stopped me. And my grandmother never corrected her grandchildren, ever. That's why she was always our favorite. My grandmother said, Ronnie, when someone gives you something, you take it, and you say, thank you.
You say thank you.
That's the fifth note. When someone gives you something, you take it, and you say thank you. So that's simple.
That's good.
But the idea of just being willing to embrace your mistakes and your failures when you are trying to learn and valuing them, respecting them, and not counting them as defeats, that will keep you pushing in the right direction no matter what. Well, folks, it's been good to be with you. I appreciate it.
Yes, we're very thankful you came. We really appreciate that. So let's give him a round of applause.